Professor Barkat-e-Khuda, Chair of the session, special guest Professor Abdul Bias, discussing Dr. Rumana Haq, paper presenters Mr. Muhammad Shahadat Hossain Siddiquee, Ms. Siban Shahana, Mr. Mir Tanzim Nur Angkur. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to the breakout session 4 on human capital development. We are very happy to have Professor Barkat-e-Khuda, the Supernumerary Professor of Economics Department at Dhaka University, as the chair for this session. Professor Abdul Bias, Director of Research and Evaluation Division, is with us today as the special guest. And Dr. Rumana Haq, Professor of Economics Department at University of Dhaka, is the discussant for this session. I would like to request Professor Barkat-e-Khuda to start the session. It's over to you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. I would like to first thank SANEM for asking me to chair this session, which I believe is of considerable importance in the context of developing countries like Bangladesh. The concept of human capital formation has relatively more importance in labor surplus countries like Bangladesh, and the transformation of the raw human resources into highly productive human resources with effective inputs of health and education is the process of human capital formation that can help address the problem of scarcity of capital in the labor surplus countries. The focus on human capital as a driver of economic growth for developing countries had led to special attention on improvements in health condition and school enrollment. Developing countries have made considerable progress in closing the gap with advanced economies in terms of school attainment. However, there's considerable room for improvement in terms of quantity, quality, and equity aspects. Also, while developing countries have made considerable progress in improving health outcomes of its people, there is considerable inequity both in terms of access to and utilization of good quality services. Further, recent research has underscored the importance of cognitive skills for economic growth, and in that area, developing countries have been much less successful in closing the gaps with developed countries. Without improving quality, developing countries will find it difficult to improve their long-run economic performance. Furthermore, East Asian countries and also Southeast Asian countries have demonstrated the potential of vocational and technical training for economic growth that is considerably lacking in many of the developing countries, especially in South Asia, including Bangladesh. With these few opening remarks, I would like to invite the authors of the paper. Each will have 10 minutes. The special guest for this session is Professor Abdul Bias, Director BRAC, Research and Evaluation. Professor Bias is a former Vice Chancellor of Jahangirnagar University and has been involved with both teaching and research for a considerable period of time. There are 3 papers here: Evaluating the Impact of Asset Transfer and Health Outcomes of the Ultra Poor by Muhammad Shahadat Hossain Siddiquee, a former student and currently a colleague of mine at the Department of Economics, now doing PhD at Manchester University. The second paper is on impact of remittances on human capital formation in Bangladesh by Siban Shahana, Research Associate, BIDS. And the third paper, Factors Determining the Choice of the Level of Education in Bangladesh, Empirical Evidence from the BBS health, what is this? HIES data, okay. Household income and expenditure data 2005, 2010. As you know, probably the 2016 round is currently underway. Okay. The discussant is Dr. Rumana Haq, again a former student and currently a colleague, Professor of Economics, University of Dhaka. So I think this is a rich panel of paper presenters, discussant, and the special guest. I would now like to ask Shahadat to make the first presentation. Each presenter will have 10 minutes because of the time constraint, then 10 minutes for the discussant and 10 minutes for a special guest. Before that, I'll open the floor for discussion.
Okay, so I should be brief as I have very limited time. This is actually the part of my PhD first papers. I work with the UltraPoor program. This is globally it is known as graduation model. Actually, it started with BRAC in 2002, and now it is replicated over 32 countries. So it is very inclusive in a sense that ultra-poor were excluded from the development interventions. So targeting the ultra-poor or graduation model is an intervention to exclude them, to upgrade them into the mainstream development interventions. First of all, I should say something about the data perspectives, because it started with quasi-experimental, so it's not an RCT. So my first paper was actually how to deal with a quasi-experimental data, to make it a much more experimental nature, to give it a more experimental nature. So actually, I used the PSM techniques. You know that this is a propensity score matching theory. It is actually applicable for the cross-sectional data. So it does not fit into the panel dimensions of the data. So I just explored with the PSM, with more treatment with the PSM that can make a more experimental type of data. So I will show it. So my first of all, so it's is it possible to treat quasi-experimental data better way? So this is the first actually the contributions of my paper. So if yes, so what are the impacts of the TUP interventions on health outcome? Actually, there are many other papers have produced many results. So I wanted to try to focus on using the same data sets with more rigorous ways to give the unbiased results compared to the others. What are the rationale? Because the previous data did not focus on the health aspects, because it is a customized health interventions program. So how does health works in the long terms? That is my main objectives to find out. So existing studies has neglected measuring impacts of health. So this is the gap. So, and you know that traditional development, that is the microcredit, the TUP is excluded, ultra-poor is excluded from the microfinance. That's why, because ultra-poor are largely bypassed by the mainstream development interventions, and they are no more likely to be reached by the existing development interventions. As they are excluded, so I wanted to focus on the health interventions of the program, because there are many definitions of health actually. What I focus on, that is the physical health, that means the self-reported health illness, and the behavioral aspects, whether they go for they shout more medical health care from the modern practitioners, and even the consumptions perspective, that is from the overall treatment, overall well-being measurements. So this is the data nature, the 4 wave of service, 2002, 5, and 11, so the same cross-sectional unit, that means same household surveys were conducted. So in that sense, I have measured short-term, medium-term, and long-term impacts. Short-term means 2005 over 2002, and medium-term 2008 over 2002, and long-term means 2011 over 2002. So this study strongly assumes validity of parallel trend assumptions, because you know that I have used the DID, difference in difference, conditional difference in difference, with the household fixed effects model. So in that sense, if you don't make the parallel trend assumptions hold, so that's the problem. So if the treatment and control groups, in the case of quasi-experimental data, if the treatment and control groups are different, in terms of observable characteristics and propensity score, they are different, then it's not possible to make the parallel trend assumptions for the different groups. That's the problem. That's why I started to make a parallel trend assumptions, because I have constructed for this data set a homogeneous group in terms of the observable characteristics and in terms of the propensity, estimated propensity score based on the PSM. So this is actually the propensity score graph. Actually, you know the different figures. Those are the untreated below and the treated is above. Among them, there are heterogeneity. That means in terms of the probability index, the inferior groups, that's the propensity score techniques produces. From that graph, I have produced a similar group from the treatment and from the control. This is my data set, which I have used for evaluating the impacts of the program. So how you look the difference? For example, in the case of full sample, the data that have been extensively used by the BRAC, that is I am calling full sample. If you look at the full sample and the last column is the difference estimates, you see the star, star, star. It means the significant differences between the treatment and control. So, and the matched sample that I have created at T1 minus T0, that is treatment 1 interventions and T0 the control. So there is no significant differences in terms of the demographic characteristics and also in the economic characteristics and also the targeting criteria, the assets that were provided, outcome criteria that was provided by the program. So what are the impacts? Actually, I will be very brief as the time is very short. So illness, this is the self-reported illness. I find the short to medium term impacts, but there is no long-term impacts on reducing illness. So TUP program helps to reduce illness among the treatment group intervention, the treatment group members up to the medium term, but in the long term, still it is positive, so it is contributions. And in the case of modern practitioners, so the care shout from the modern practitioners, it still up to the mid-term effects, no long-term effect of the program. In the case of health status, self-reported health status, how do you feel? And the comparative health improvement, how you are better compared to the previous. So there is a short-term impacts on the health improvements. Similarly, and the environmental case, short-term up to the mid-term impact, there is a significant impact up to the mid-term. But in the long-term cases, in the case of proper sanitation uses, drastically declines and the significantly negative. So they are worse off in the long-term. But they improve the cooking behavior of water from the drinking and cooking purposes very well. And the similar findings is evidenced, but the program is still doing better in terms of the long term in the case of per capita food consumption expenditures and also the healthcare expenditures. So that's the end of my story. Thank you very much.
I would now request Siban Shahana to make the presentation. 10 minutes.
Capital investment in Bangladesh. Before going into details, I would like to mention a few words of motivation that why I have opted for this research topic. As we all know that every year 2 million additional young workers join the labor force of Bangladesh. But the home economy is not capable to produce as much job as needed to absorb all these additional workers. And therefore, every year, a significant portion of workers go abroad to search for works and send back remittance, which is a steadily growing source of external capital for the country. And these remittances plays an important role in the development process of Bangladesh. It accelerates the economic growth. It reduces the pressure of unemployment and boosts up the capacity of import payment. But all these were the impact at macro level. At micro level, remittances helps increase consumption of the remittance receiving household, and at the same time, it also improves the capacity to save and invest. The migrants' family in home, they enjoy better liquidity situation, and it shifts up their budget constraints so that they can fulfill their basic consumption needs. However, if the entire remittance amount is spent on consumption, that may not serve as a long-term, that may not contribute to the long-term economic growth of the country. It's only through asset accumulation and human capital investment that remittances can serve as a vehicle to growth. Therefore, it is very important to see how these remittances are used in the home country. In many ways, the most effective type of investment that a migrant can make is in the education for his or her children. However, given the contradiction between returns to education and low intergenerational mobility, especially for households where parents have low level of education, the question becomes how they will spend their limited resources towards investment in human capital, or in other words, how they will spend it for the education of their children. A model developed by Baker in 1994 says that in situations where parents do not have full access to capital and they cannot borrow to finance their children's education, they cannot separate investing for children education and their consumption. Therefore, even after having better liquidity, it is not guaranteed that a remittance receiving household will spend more on their children's education. Saying all these things, in my study, I would like to investigate the impact of remittances on child education for households with migrants in Bangladesh. By the beginning of 1980s, the importance of remittance in compensating the human capital loss for developing countries was already recognized being recognized. And the importance of remittances became a topic of political debate, and as well as in-depth research leading to mushrooming of scientific literatures. I would like to mention a few of them. There is two opposing schools about the use of remittances. Chami et al., 1993, some say that remittances are only used for consumption, and others say that not only consumption, but remittances are also used for investment. Chami et al. Is in the first school of thought. They say that a significant proportion of the remittances are spent on status-oriented good. Adams et al. Are in the opposite school of thought, and they say that the household receiving international remittances spend less at margin on food, a consumption good, and more at margin on two investment good. And these author believes that the remittance receiving households spend more on investment because they consider remittances as a transitory income, and the marginal propensity to invest out of transitory income is higher. And I'll not go into more details. There are some other literature reviews done for Bangladesh and other countries, and there are mixed impact were found. For the estimation purpose, I have used HIES data for 2010 and I have used for my estimation procedure, I have estimated the model in 4 specification. Along with OLS, I have opted for two-stage least square with IV and PSM. And I have used the instrumental variable as the intensity of migration by district, and another interaction term where I have interacted the migration status of a household with GDP fluctuation of the destination country. And for that data, I have opted the GDP fluctuation from World Bank data. So as I have mentioned that to to overcome the challenges associated with migration and remittances, I have estimated the model in 4 specifications, and this is the module of the household survey that I have mainly concentrated. They have detailed information on migration and remittances, and it also reports about the education expenditure in a disaggregated way. Here are some descriptive statistics. Almost 10% of my households have an international remitter, and here are the education level and the associated expenditure. This is my result in very short. I have controlled for various socioeconomic covariates like the household heads, gender, education level, income, asset, etc. And my main variable of interest. In the first column, I have treated my dependent variable was the log of education expenditure, and it says that having international remittance affected significantly. In the second specification, I have used the remitted amount, and that is also significant. And in my IV regression, I have that also came out to be significant. I have also considered district level fixed effect, and the standard error were clustered. My test for IV, validity IV says the F statistics was greater than 10, and it was a valid IV, and there was no over-identification. This is my PSM result, and the PSM result also shows that the difference between the control and the treated group is significant. That is also saying that the remittance amount, the amount of remittance increases education expenditure, which is in alignment with the theory that the marginal propensity to invest out of the transitory income is higher. And as I don't have time, I would like to end with mentioning a few of the limitations of the study. In literature, there is mentioning of migration, on offsetting effect of migration and remittances. However, I was in my study, I couldn't capture the effect of migration. And to see the effect of human capital investment, I have considered only education expenditure. However, there are other indicators like school attainment or school performances. Because of limitation of data, I couldn't capture that. And the usual disclaimer to the PSM technique applies. Thank you.
Third, I would like to ask Tanzim to make the presentation on behalf of himself and his colleague Nafiz.
Good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Tanzim Angkur. I'm going to present my paper on factors determining the choice of level of education in Bangladesh. I've taken the information from HIES of 2005 and 2010. Since I don't have much time, so I will go straight into my objectives. Okay. The main objectives of the paper is to ascertain the factors which determines the choice of level of education from an individual point of view. Apart from these main objectives, I would like to have some other objectives also. For example, how remittance affect the decision of attaining the level of education. And moreover, I want to see whether there is any discrimination between rural and urban areas in case of educational attainment. Moreover, I want to see whether there is a gender discrimination in case of educational attainment. So these are the literature reviews, what the other studies have done before to determine the factors. Those factors usually come from three things. For example, individual characteristics such as age and sex. Then there are some household characteristics such as family size, location of the households, and attributes of other family members. Moreover, there is financial factors such as household income and landholding also determines the choice of level of education. So I'll just go back. I'm just focusing on my methodology and data. By studying the literature review, I just propose the following regression model, where we have the literacy as the dependent variable and other independent variables that are coming from individual characteristics, household characteristics, and financial factors. And the one important point is that the literacy I have defined here, I have defined into 5 categories. For example, literacy 0 means below primary. That means those individuals who have schooling year between 0 and 4 schooling year considered in this below group. Then we have literacy 1, that is primary passed, and the schooling year is between 5 and 9. Then I have taken literacy 2, which is SSC passed. Individuals' schooling year is between 10 and 11. Then as go on, for example, the last literacy, that is 4, that is called, I have defined it as graduation and above, and the schooling year is 16 and above. So this is the justification of why I have chosen ordered logistic education function, because of the fact the dependent variable is a categorical one, and it is more than 2 categories, and which we can order. For example, below primary is the lowest level of education, and graduation above is the highest level of education. One thing we need to keep in mind, the values we have assigned here, for example, literacy 0 is not of that importance to us, but the fact is that 0 literacy means lowest level of education, and literacy 4 means highest outcome. So as I've already told you, I have taken the data from 2005 and 2010 HIES data. So considering this, and these are the independent variables which I have taken. As you can see, the first 2 relates to individual characteristics, age is in years of the individuals, and then I have considered a dummy for gender, which is male. If it is 1, that means the individual is a male. And I've also taken a location dummy, which is here you can see rural, which is equal to 1 if the individual is coming from a rural household. And these are the other independent value descriptions is given. One thing is important here, I have taken remittance dummy. That means those households which receive either domestic or foreign remittance, they are considered as 1. And I have taken also the dummy for 2010 just to see whether the effect has changes over time or not. So by considering all those things, I have just estimated this by using ordered logistic regression. As you can see, almost all of the independent variables are significant at 10% level of significance, except the dummy for rural and interaction dummy for rural and dummy 2010. So what is the interpretation? Okay, if I say some, for example, as you can see, being male increases the chance of choosing high level of education compared to that of female. If you consider the household characteristics such as family size, it decreases the chance of choosing the higher level of education. Another thing, the household characteristics in terms of education of other family members also influences individual of choosing high level of education. And as expected, total consumption is a proxy for income, and land holding is also a proxy for financial ability of the household, which also increases the chance of choosing the high level of literacy for an individual. Okay, there is also one kind of discrimination. That means individuals who are coming from rural areas has more chance of achieving lower level of literacy compared to individuals coming from urban areas. And there's also an interesting findings which we have got here. The chance of achieving higher level of literacy for individuals belonging from an remittance receiving households are less. If, for example, those individuals who are coming from households who are having remittance, they tend to actually choose less level of education compared to the households of non-receiving households. So these are the marginal effects of my estimation. As you can see, almost all of them are significant at 10% level of significance. This is also all of them are, except, as I've already told you, the interaction term between rural and 2010 dummy. So since I have limited time, I will just put some interpretation of my marginal effects. As I've already told you, there's a discrimination in the lower level of education. As you can see, compared to female, male has 6.5% points lower probability of being in the lower below primary. But as you move to the upper education level, the difference between male and female gets lowered. In case of education of other family members, if you move to the upper level of education, the favorable impact of family members gets lowered. That means, as you can see from the lower part of the year, the probability gets reduced 2.6%, 2.1, 1.2, and 0.43. Now, the effect of remittance, as I've already told you, an individual from remittance receiving household has 5.3 percentage point higher chance of being in the below primary. But if they move to the upper ladder of the education level, the effect gets negative. That means the effect gets reduces, implying that if we move to the upper level of education, the adverse effect of migration remittance gets lowered. And the effect of location, as you can see, an individual from rural areas has 8.8% point higher chance of being in the lower group, but if you see if they come from urban areas, they are more inclined to take the upper ladder of the education level compared to the rural individual. So the conclusion and policy implication is that till 2010, since we have taken data up to 2010, there exists gender discrimination, especially at the upper level of the education ladder, in spite of the policies the government has put in to address this issue. Another thing what we have seen, other families' medical education has a positive influence on individual choice of level of education. So the fact is that we need to invest more on education because it has a multiplier effect. This is the third point is basically there's discrimination coming from the location also. Individuals from rural areas are lagging behind their urban counterparts in case of achieving higher level of education. That means it is high time we need to reform our policies targeting the education system of the rural areas. And last but not the least, interestingly, we have seen remittance adversely affect individual choice of attaining high level of education, which is to some extent quite alarming for us because we always see the positive effects of remittance, but remittance, in this on our study, what we have found that it is affecting adversely in case of individuals going for upper level of education. So that's it I have. Thank you.
Kept the presentation within the allotted time. I would now request Professor Rumana Haq, the discussant for this session, to make her presentation.
Thank you. I take the opportunity to thank SANEM to invite me in this session, and it's an honor for me to be here with Barkat-e-Khuda sir and Professor Abdul and getting the opportunity to discuss about the three excellent papers that they have already presented. The first point I would like to say is that in most cases we have the tendency to conduct large-scale studies, rather not focusing on what we already have and analyzing the secondary data. So this is very commendable that the three presenters used some existing data and looked into it from a different dimension and presented really important findings for us. So thanks to three of them. First, in general for the three presenters, one comment is when we use the secondary data, it's always preferable to argue that why we are using these special data, for example, household income and expenditure survey data, just because maybe there is no other data available, that's fine. But we have to argue because we have to show that when we are using the secondary data, it is reliable, because I'm not responsible for collecting data, so I don't know how the quality has been maintained. So if we can say that, okay, it's international, nationally representative data and covers all this, that strengthens the paper. So we should not assume that everybody knows what is household income and expenditure survey data. Rather, we should focus in our paper that wow, this is the only data that is available that I can use, and this is really nationally representative, and what I'm suggesting or what I'm presenting based on this data source, the source itself is a valid source. So this for all the three presenters. I'm giving some comments because I have received the papers for both Shahadat and Siban, so I have read the papers. That's why I thought that it is important if they argue in that way. Now, if I talk about Shahadat Hossain Siddiquee's papers. It's an excellent paper, very rigorous method applied, and interesting findings. I learned a lot from the paper and the method he used, so thank you so much for enlightening us. Having said that, maybe a few issues might be helpful for the readers, for example, starting with what is ultra poor, because in our country when we say poverty, and we say poor, we define poor and poverty level in different ways, and we have more than 100 safety nets program in Bangladesh, and each are defining poverty from their own perspective. Even within Ministry of Health, the way we define poor, and even the urban health for the city corporation, the way they are providing, defining poor is different. So some people can be excluded if we change the definition of poor or ultra poor. So how we are defining that? In the paper, what is the intervention? I realized from your presentation also that, okay, those who are seeking the care are in the intervention and who are not are in the control, but getting it more clearly written in the paper would really help the reader that what is the intervention of this study and what you're comparing with, and how you are defining the control group a bit. It is there and it is clear for most of us, but maybe some of the readers might not be very familiar with what is intervention, what is control group, so a more clarity on that might help. So treated versus non-treated at the very you mentioned that it is my data set at some point when you were presenting. So we, the readers, would really love that how you have extracted and created your data set from that would really strengthen the paper. The findings that there are a midterm effect but not long-term effect for these targeted approach is really a very good finding. I think the policymakers would take from there. This is the takeaway message for me as well, that all the safety nets, we are spending lots of money, and now there is a coordination center in Ministry of Finance who are looking at the safety nets of the 5 ministries, so maybe how they are coordinating all these, and if there is no long-term effect, then how we can make sure that there are long-term effects for these. So that is really a very good findings. And the last comment for Shahadat's presentation is, when we say treated and untreated, because we all agree and we discuss in different forums that the healthcare seeking pattern varies and things are changing because of non-communicable disease coming up. So what treatment you are considering? Is it only the major communicable diseases or the chronic and non-communicable diseases that are also included in your treatment basket? That is very important, because maybe there is no long-term effect because the NCDs are not covered in the treatment package. It's only maybe the, so maybe, so that is something you can explore and let us know in the future presentation. And for Siban, and given the time constraint, just 2 of the papers, also very important that how remittance is influencing. But maybe me and Sar, we would also love to see not only education, but also if health was included as how remittance is influencing. So for the future, maybe your analysis, as it is social capital and capital development you were discussing. There's a slight difference in the two, the way of analyzing the same data set. So Siban's presentation is overall suggesting that it is not affecting, or but his presentation was saying that in the primary level it is a positive effect, but the long term it's not positive effect. But Siban's was overall it is effective. So maybe that is that raises the question of that how we can discuss or do presentation or conducting the analysis in a coherent way, because Raihan in 2009, he also discussed and analyzed the data, and the assumptions were the same to look at how the remittance influences the education. So when we are again doing in 2016, so how our studies using 2 different methods for the same data set, how we are contributing to the existing knowledge, that might come more strongly in the paper, that, okay, what were the limitations of the previous study done by Raihan in 2009? What is the value addition for these studies? And when we are analyzing the data, so if we, for example, Siban is doing for the general overall, and some other are doing, by education level, like primary, secondary, so at the same forum, maybe for us as well, take away message that maybe more rigorous analysis is needed because of this slightly different approach of doing the studies. So I again want to thank, just 1 minute remaining, thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity, and I hope that this trend continues of analyzing the secondary data, and those who are interested to analyze this secondary data, I hope that in the near future, those who are generating this sort of cohort, the researchers get access to those data set as well. It is only demographic and health survey, household expenditure survey, that data we get, but lots of other like BRAC or ICT-DRB or many other organizations has cohort, and they are collecting data for long, but we, the researchers, really don't have access to. Maybe from this forum, it is a takeaway message for the organizations to allow the researchers access to those data sets so that they can come up with some different dimension and some analysis of the existing data. So thank you so much, sir, for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Rumana. We can now, I'm sure several of you have questions from the audience, so we can take questions. Yes. Will you please introduce yourself and then ask the question, and very briefly, to the point.
I am Alad Mohammad Fazlul Haq, Vice President of Asian Youth Council and Chairman of National Youth and Social Council. One of our big projects is the Smiling Sun clinics, funded by USAID in UK. It was young people, some 30 years back, started, Dr. He also knows. My question is to you, that about the health program, if you can also use some data from the Smiling Sun clinics headquarters, you can get many more very important things. And my question is that if this funding go out, what in your opinion, how these health services can be sustainable, self-running? Thank you very much.
Next. So the authors, please take note of the questions.
আমার নাম মোহাম্মদ আব্দুল হাই, যেহেতু আর কেউ নাই, বাংলাও বলতে পারে, ইংরেজিতে বলতে পারে। স্যার, আমি আপনার ছাত্র 70 দশকে এবং বাংলাদেশ অর্থনীতি সমিতির আমি একজন সদস্য। তো আমার প্রশ্নটা একটু কুয়েরি আর কি, সিবান শাহানা এবং মিস্টার তানজিমের উপর। যে সিবান শাহানা বলেছেন যে রিমিটেন্সের যে ব্যাপারটা 75% কনজাম্পশনে খরচ হয়, 25% ইনভেস্টমেন্টে, এই যে সোর্স বলেছেন। কিন্তু আমার একটু কথা হলো যে লেখাপড়ায় বা এডুকেশনে এটার মানে কোনো রিমিটেন্সের ইয়াটা কি, ইম্প্যাক্টটা কি, এটা কোনো পজিটিভ কি ইম্প্যাক্টটা কি একটা। আরেকটা হচ্ছে মিস্টার তানজিমের উপর যে কথাটা, যে উনি বলেছেন অবজেক্টিভের উপর একটা ছিল যে চেঞ্জেস অফ অর ডিফারেন্স বিটুইন আরবান অ্যান্ড রুরাল স্টুডেন্ট ইন অ্যাটেন্ডিং এডুকেশন বা একটা কথা বলছিলেন। এটা উনি অবজেক্টিভের আউটপুটও বলেছেন। কিন্তু আমার কথাটা হচ্ছে যে আপনি মুদ্রা কথা হবে যে অ্যাক্সেস টু এডুকেশনটা সেখানে রুরাল এবং আরবানের জনসংখ্যার অবস্থাটা কি, সেখানে এই যে প্রাইভেট ইউনিভার্সিটি আর পাবলিক ইউনিভার্সিটি, আপনার প্রাইভেট ইউনিভার্সিটি বলেন, বা কতটুকু এখন আগের তুলনায় কতটুকু তার অ্যাক্সেস আছে, এই কথাটা আপনার একটু যদি কোনো আসছে কিনা। আর সেটা হচ্ছে যে এই একটা, আর আরেকটা কথা বলেন, হোয়াট ইজ দ্য নেক্সাস বিটুইন হিউম্যান ক্যাপিটাল ডেভেলপমেন্ট অ্যান্ড ইনক্লুসিভ গ্রোথ, নেক্সাসটা কি? এবং সেখানে যে শুধু খালি এখন যে নাম্বারস অফ পপুলেশন ইন এডুকেশন কিন্তু বাড়ছে, তো সেখানে কি কোয়ালিটি এডুকেশনের অবস্থাটা কি, সেটা একটু যদি মার্ক করেন। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you, sir, for giving me the chance. I am Krishna Roy Chaudhary from Institute of Health Economics, University of Dhaka, studying in Masters. I was really enjoying the lectures given by all the panelists. So my question is to Tanzim Angkur, sir. You were talking about the effect of remittances on literacy level. So we know that these remittances are very important. We are always giving importance to remittances coming to our country. So from your paper, we can see that those households who are getting remittances, they are not investing in higher level of education. So how do you see this, and how it can be improved? That is, as they are getting remittances, so how it can be, the situation can be improved if we are getting more remittances in our country, how it can affect the higher level of education level. And also to Siban Shahana ma'am, you are also talking about that impact of remittances on human capital formation. So how can this be also improved if the remittances are coming? So how can we improve the human capital formation in our country? How can we improve the situation? So thank you all.
I'm Nafiz, Deputy General Manager, Bangladesh Bank. I just add one question, which she has already asked. Hello. My question is, remittance receiving family have less choice of higher education, and what is the reason behind this? This is my question. Assalamu alaikum. I am Shahadat from Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics. My query is to Mr. Tanzim. You have used many independent variables, so definitely there is a multi-correlationality exists. My question is, what is your treatment on the multi-correlationality issues? Thank you.
My name is Amitabh Chakraborty. I was with the government. I was Director General, World Trade Organization. My question, it is because the topics is the managing growth for social inclusion, right? So we have just listened to 3 research papers. It was excellent, no doubt. But what my understanding is that it's not a criticism. I think in that manner that social inclusion, what is the growth and social inclusion? Growth versus social inclusion. Social inclusion, that is to take the people with you and take the people for the growth, because without taking the people with you, growth cannot be possible. This is the main thing. So in this 3 paper, we have to see 3 different angles we have discussed. Whether how it is related to the social inclusion. You are left out the children, you are talking about the remittance, but whether is there any problem to take the left out people or take the disadvantaged people in these 3 areas? This is number 1. Number 2 is that, do you have any policy recommendation for the government, for the policymakers or something like that? And because all our statistics is really very good, and but I think for better for us, for the general people, if you can also analyze, you can address the issues regarding the social inclusion and any suggestions for the policymakers, that will be more fruitful. This is my personal findings. Thank you.
First of all, thanks, Dr. Rumana Haq, for very nice comments. Actually, that I have presented is the first paper, but I have the context paper as part of my PhD. You know that there is a context chapters. So everything is there, where it happens, how it happens, for where it happens, for whom it happens. Actually, there is the definitions of ultra poor, because it was a very rigorous process of selecting the ultra poor who are left out from the traditional microfinance, even the existing VGD, BGF, such kind of the social safety nets program. So it was determined, actually, I should be brief, it was determined by the participatory wealth ranking, because the whole village was selected. Among the villagers, each households were selected in that group, this group, this group. People says, so the participation is there. So the last category was recognized as the ultra poor, and that ultra poor, a questionnaire was surveyed, what he has, what he owns, the assets in terms of, and the consumptions better and all this. So in that way, and DFID was leading positions in that case of selection, and BRAC actually maintained that process. So ultra poor was defined in that way. And definitions of interventions was there. It was actually the asset transfer. That asset is actually the, we can say, the poultry, dairy, such kind of productive assets. Those can generate assets, not in terms of cash was also there to smooth their consumptions. But the amount was 10,000 to 15,000 assets were provided to the extreme poor, and the nursing was there. It hold up for 2 years. Then they can can graduate to the mainstream activities, such kind of. And in terms of, you raised another questions in terms of disease care shout from the modern practitioners. It was actually what kind of diseases held in the last 1 year and for where they got that treated, so that we can know the behavioral change. That means whether they can care shout from the modern practitioners or not. That means whether it has the impacts on the behavioral change of the beneficiaries. It was addressed. Another question was smiling data. I can use the data, but you raised the questions regarding the health service sustainability. Actually, that's my questions too, because as we are dealing with the extreme poor with such kind of interventions, most of them don't have the lands. Actually, landlessness is the prevailing and the most conditions. So when they upgrade their economic conditions, at the initial stage, they were provided the sanitations, and the sanitations, proper sanitation sustains up to 4 to 8 years or 9 years, but it does not sustain up to 10 years. So when it becomes worst or deteriorate, they never replace, because what is their priority from the perspective of the ultra poor? It is their security. And what is the security issue of the extreme poor? That is the land. Land gives their security and is their house. They need a house, constructed house. So they are still emphasizing on the constructing a new house, buying a new land for them, not going to the sanitations. That's why in the case of long-term scenario, when I dealt with the long-term, it has not been dealt with this existing data yet before, that is drastically declines, and the impact is negatively statistically significant. That's the issue for not sustaining that issue. And Amitabh raised the questions of social exclusions. That is also part of my answer, I think, social inclusions, because the things that I have included, that is the graduation model. You know, graduation model is the best example now today's in the globe for the case of example of social inclusions, because those who are extreme poor or left out from the social development interventions, that means how we can include. That's why all the donor organizations now replicating this model across the globe, how the extreme poor can be included to the development interventions, and they can upgrade their mainstream and livelihoods. Thank you so much.
Sar has asked me a question about if the remittance receiving households are spending more on education. Yes, according to my estimation findings, the asked me about a statistics that I have mentioned. That is taken from survey of use of remittances 2013 conducted by BBS. And actually, I cannot do anything about that statistics. The remittance receiving households are saying that they spend 25% of the remittances on investment. But one information that in that study, they actually haven't considered education as an investment good, but rather in the consumption side. And then there was another question that how we can improve the growth of the investment in human capital. Actually, we cannot, I don't know if I'm wrong. One of my learned colleagues also asked me that what is the difference between remittance and isn't it the income effect? So it's up to the household that on what they want to spend the remittance on. But there is always awareness policy. If we want to enhance the education, we have to raise awareness. Awareness is the sunshine policy. And then I agree, spreading education, that's a part of inclusion, I believe. So by increasing the awareness for education, we can include the children and the poor segment of the society in our growth process. Thank you.
So thank you. I've got 3 questions. First of all, one of the questions was related to remittance. In my paper, I'm just calculating the probability. The remittance effect is positive, no doubt, but the fact is that when a household is receiving remittance, their children tend to be less attentive on education. They end up getting a lower level of education. For example, if a household receives remittance, if you consider any household, you can see whenever there's money coming from abroad, they give importance less to education, what we have got from the data. Another thing is that I've used data up to 2010. It's not the current one. So most probably the data is giving me this information, so I'm just conveying this information. And another thing, what he has, one of the asked me about multicollinearity. The thing is that there should be some collinearity, but the thing is that there must be low collinearity. Why? Because of the fact all of my independent variables have significance. So if there was a high level of multicollinearity, so these independent variables would not have that significant level. Another thing is talk about rural and urban thing. As I've already told you, it's a probability. If you see the families from rural areas, if you pick one of them, you will see they have, the individuals might be only HSC passed. But if you compare to that with urban areas, if you pick any household, you might find people having graduation and above. So this could be the reason why I've got this kind of location bias basically. And talking about social inclusion, I have already pointed out there may be some discrimination location based, and also in case of gender. So the thing is that we need to emphasize more on the rural areas. We know there is a policy for government, but that's more general. So we want to give more importance to the rural-based areas. And regarding female education, what we have got in the lower level of education, male are having more probability of achieving below past primary or something like that. But as you move above the education level, the discrimination is lowered, as we have got from the data that the probability is getting small. So that means at higher level of education, there's 50-50 chance of male and female having this. But at the lower end, more male are having the chance rather than the female. So it's more of the probability rather than the what is the effect on this. So that's all I have to say.
I will now request Professor Bias to make his observations.
Thank you, Barkat-e-Khuda bhai. I thank SANEM, especially Selim Raihan, for inviting me to be present as a special guest. And I also thank them for giving me a very light responsibility. Special guest does not need to have comment on technical things. It is assumed that he will talk on general, from general side. So I take this opportunity of saying something very general. First, I congratulate the presenters. Very interesting, insightful 3 papers by 3 young researchers. The first issue that I want to raise, it was imposed on me by the chairperson. He said that you should earn your lunch by answering to the question of social inclusion and policy tips. To start with, actually, all 3 issues have social inclusion element because for example, targeting the ultra-poor, graduation model. This is a brainchild or pioneered by BRAC. It is now operating in 10 other countries of the world. And Avijit Banerjee, Studalla, all other scientists, social scientists, found that this is very, very effective model for graduation in other countries. So it is a policy tip. The government in Bangladesh, in their 7th five-year plan, the target is to reduce extreme poverty. Okay, this model can be tested and this model can be adopted. So this is a policy prescription. Similarly, migration, we have a mindset that we always think that rich people migrate to other countries. No, nowadays poor people are migrating, and landless people, households, people from landless households, they are migrating. Now, how to help them in getting migrated? How to help them in getting safe migration? So these policy issues are also there. Similarly, in education, I'm not going into details. Secondly, coming to the research papers presentation, just I will talk on the targeting ultra-poor graduation model. Shahadat has done a very interesting thing, but the methodology is quite different. We have in BRAC, we have done RCT, randomized control trial. And we have found that even after 7 years, it is a 2-year program, but we visited after 7 years, and we found that their income, consumption are sustained. So a priori reasoning suggests that their health status or health side is also maintained or sustained over longer term. What surprised me is the negative effect on sanitary latrines. In RCT, we found, positive, but that needs to be very much explained why you get the negative sign. Now, few general comments. I mean, I'm not going to I dare not to deal with that theoretical nexus between human capital and development. You all know that. But suffice it to say that the role of human capital differs in different stages of development. So in Bangladesh, if we have, once we had that green revolution or agriculture modernization, the requirement is relatively modest. Primary school, maximum secondary school. Then if you go for, say, export-led growth of ready-made garments, the requirement is maximum HSC level or something like that. Now if you enter into a service sector, then the problem comes, then you need to have more technical or vocational training, you need to have more tertiary education. In a recent research, we find that 1/3 of our youth labor force are unutilized. They neither go to schools or colleges, nor they do anything. So when we talk about demographic dividend, we should think that 1/3 of our youth labor force are not doing anything. How to bring them into the market? And chances of being unemployed are higher among the educated youth. So what kind of education we are giving that people are not getting jobs? I'm not going to Amartya Sen's that observation that if someone feels that his training does not fit with the work, he may feel unemployed. No. But in our country, we see that there is a spree for more general education, more university educations, rather than more technical and vocational training. From our boyhood, we have been learning that. Even later, when he visited Bangladesh in 1997, he said that Bangladesh should have vocational training in Upuzil or Thana. But yet, that thing is not done. We are very much obsessed with our university education, and we plan to establish universities in every district. So my contention is that given that Bangladesh needs to achieve 8% growth rate, needs to create decent jobs, the educational system and educational arguments behind human capital should also change, and you should take a holistic view of how to employ this young and youth labor force. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye. Thanks a lot. If there is no other question from the floor, I would like to close by making a few observations. Let me first start with the paper presented by Shahadat. I think it's an excellent paper, but I have a few observations. Shahadat, you're talking of behavior change in the short run, medium term, and long term. Behavior change takes time. And I'm not surprised that you don't see much of behavior change in the long run. But what puzzles me, you're talking about impact. You're basically studying effects, not impact. When you give an input, you look at the process, then you look at the effects, and then only you look at the impact. Impact in your study would have been measured by indicators such as improvements in health outcomes, which is measured by indicators such as decline in infant and child mortality, decline in maternal mortality ratio, which is not possible given the small sample size. But we could have looked at access by pregnant women, access to ANC, PNC, and safe delivery practices. Second, when measuring effects of TUP, of your intervention, and don't call it impact, it would be useful to show the effects on a specific measurable health indicators, as I just pointed out. Next, let me turn to Shahana. Her findings are in the expected direction, but I would ask her to go for more extensive review of the literature. A lot of literature in this field which has not been addressed in this study. Now, there is also evidence to the contrary. Remittance, the positive effect on education, but you also have remittance has some negative effect at the household level. If the head of the household moves out, be it internal migration or external, other members of the household, school-going children, may have to take up the work. So that is, so they drop out of the school and they have to do the work. In case of women migrating, mothers, then what happens? The duration, obviously, of breastfeeding goes down. nutritional care goes down. So these are the negative impacts of remittance. Let me close again with some general observations. We are talking about human capital formation and social inclusion. I think there's a lot that we can learn from East Asia, also Southeast Asia. East Asian countries have enjoyed enormous success in human capital formation, which further contributed to economic miracles and social development. Now, what have been the factors, main factors contributing to this? And what lessons can countries like Bangladesh learn? Several economic, demographic, political, and cultural factors seem to be quite important in terms of providing a highly conducive environment for sustained heavy investments in education. First, rapid economic growth. Second, significant decline in population growth, and Bangladesh has achieved significant decline in population growth. Third, equitable income distribution. Fourth, cultural and political factors. We have heard Siddique making a brilliant presentation on democracy and development, and many of you were here, so I'm sure you have learned a lot from that lecture. These factors not only allow the Asian countries and more recently the South Asian countries to spend more and more on education, but also to restructure their education budgets away from areas of quantitative expansion. We see a lot of quantitative expansion in the context of Bangladesh, and in favor of improvements in quality and equity. Also, the political commitment to support education and link it to development, socioeconomic development, is one of the important determinants of educational expansion. If you look at Singapore, Korea, Japan, and China, most of the education reforms clearly aimed at forging strong links between education and economic development. Education systems are made functional and pragmatic. This was reflected in the pattern of resource allocation. This calls for developing countries like Bangladesh to be able to allocate reasonably high proportion of the national income, GDP, for example, 6%, if we want to take lesson from East Asia, and a reasonably high proportion of the government budget, about 1/5 to 1/4, to education. A closely related aspect is that it is not only development of a good quality education system, but also efficient utilization of the graduate output through a high degree of coordination between education planning and human resource planning for economic development. That has been an important factor in the success of East Asian countries. Generally speaking, there is a lack of effective coordination between education planning and human resource planning in countries like Bangladesh. Now, what do we see in Bangladesh? In the education sector, though Bangladesh has made considerable improvement in terms of enrollment at the primary and secondary level, and we have achieved the MDG goals, there is high dropout rate and repetition rate with low completion rates. Vocational and technical education continue to remain neglected areas. Also, there is considerable room for improvement in the quality of education. Unfortunately, in Bangladesh, we don't have major studies on quality of education. There was one study conducted, I think, by BBS in 2011. We showed that only 44% of boys and 36% of girls completing primary school were functionally literate, could read, write, do some arithmetic. Even among those with completed secondary education, the functional literacy was 70% among both boys and girls. Thus, the most crucial task Bangladesh faces is equipping its ever-increasing number of youth with education and skills training. We talk about demographic dividend, already somebody had alluded to that. We cannot reap the benefits of demographic dividend with an unhealthy, unskilled labor force. In Bangladesh, only 2.4% of the GDP is spent on education, compared to 5% each in South Korea and Brazil, 4.7% in Iran. Even in Nepal, it's 4.6%, China 4.3%, Thailand and Malaysia 4.1% each. In India, it's 3.1%. So there is a need to reasonably allocate high proportion of our national income to education to improve quantity, quality, and equity aspects of education. Now, if you look at health, although the healthcare sector in South Asia is growing rapidly, public spending has remained quite small. And out-of-pocket expense is around 2/3 to even higher levels in different countries. If you look at the per capita expenditure on health, it remains only around 40% in the case of Bangladesh compared to the WHO recommended, which is $54 per capita. Health insurance is low. Health insurance coverage is low and limited, and the region has one of the world's, as I said, highest out-of-pocket spending in healthcare. Looking at 2017 and beyond, healthcare delivery system will need to turn to innovative business models to improve access, increase quality, and simultaneously increase resource utilization to ensure growth. Finally, the innovative use of technology such as telemedicine is helping healthcare providers maximize limited resources at a low cost. Some of this has begun in Bangladesh, but on a very, very limited scale at by the Directorate General of Health Services. In Bangladesh, despite the success achieved in the health sector in terms of raising life expectancy, of course, through reduction in infant and child mortality, also reduction in maternal mortality, increase in contraceptive prevalence, reduction in fertility to almost near replacement, and considerably better than most other South Asian countries except Sri Lanka. Malnutrition continues to be a major problem affecting the health status of the population. There is a direct link between undernourishment and impaired cognitive development, and therefore Bangladesh fails to improve the nutritional status of its children, its future productivity and development will be seriously curtailed. If you look at the GDP figures, only 3.7% of GDP is spent on healthcare in Bangladesh compared to 10% in Japan, 10% in Brazil, 7% in South Korea, Iran almost 7%, Nepal 6%, China 5.6%, and Singapore 4.6%. So as I said earlier, based on the latest WHO estimate of $54 US per capita, Bangladesh spends only around 40% of the estimated amount on healthcare. Thus, there is much more to be done. Though we talk about considerable success in health and education, much more needs to be done in Bangladesh and South Asia as a whole. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you all. Now we move on to the crest presenting ceremony. I would like to request Professor Barkat-e-Khuda to present the crest to Professor Abdul Bias. I would like to request Professor Barkat-e-Khuda to present the crest to Professor Abdul Bias. To Dr. Rumana Haq. To Mr. Muhammad Shahadat Hossain Siddiquee. To Ms. Siban Shahana. And finally, to Mr. Tanzim Angkur. Thank you, sir. Now, may I request Mohammad Mushir Rahman from SANEM to present the crest to Professor Barkat-e-Khuda. Thank you, everyone. That was the end of the session. Our next